You see the screen? Okay, hello, welcome to my talk. My name is Bert Chen, an independent researcher in Hong Kong. I'm going to talk about Lenia, that is a continuous cellular automata. First, we want to ask the questions in Alife. How lifelike can artificial life systems be? And which kind of life phenomena can we observe that is simulated or emerge in an Alife system? Like this lanterns loop in the left-hand side, they looks like a cell division, and on the right-hand side. We start from the famous cellular automata, that is a common scheme of life. This is a grid of sites that each site has a 0 or 1 value and an Excel neighborhood. We do a update rule by first counting the neighbors and then look up the next value in the table and then do an update to the grid. It produces some very interesting creatures like this glider that's moving along the grid. So in Lenia, we make everything continuous by generalizing the rules. The 0 or 1 values in each site, we set it as a real value between 0 and 1. For the neighborhood, we make a longer range, larger, and circular neighborhood. Instead of counting the neighbors, the Excel neighbors, we do a weighted sum. That means a convolution with a circular kernel. And finally, for the update rule, we don't use a lookup table. We do a smooth mapping function on the results and do incremental updates. These changes make the space-time and the values continuous, and also there's some strange creatures come out from the system. So now we call this continuous cellular automata Lenia. I did a detailed study of this system. We find self-organizing geometric lifeforms that is highly diverse. I find more than 400 species now. These lifeforms, they have usually symmetric structures, and their dynamics are usually regular, like moving forward or rotating, something like that. And sometimes they become chaotic and irregular, only in some cases. I did a detailed exploration of the parameter and behavior space and wrote a paper that published in Compressed Systems last year. I also made a video in Alife conference 2018 back in Tokyo. Now we try to extend the rules of Lenia. The original rule was there's a road and we do convolution and smooth mapping, incremental updates that move into the next time step. In this extension, we extend the 2D world into 3D or even higher dimensions. And for the convolutional kernel, we multiply the single one into multiple kernels. And for the world, now it's just one grid. We produce multiple channels. By making these extensions, we try to see what happens to this system. Will they create more interesting life forms? But for the architecture itself, the architecture itself becomes more like a neural network. It is not expected. We call this recurrent residual convolutional neural network. The architecture is look like the right-hand side corner. In this extended system, we find more new life forms that the diversity is exploding. And it's very hard for us to explore the parameter and behavior space manually. So I use a few semi-automatic search algorithms like genetic algorithms. The selection criteria is just survival. That means if they survive in the system, then I will choose them to do more studies. The structures of these creatures becomes more irregular, and their dynamics becomes more chaotic compared to the original system. That means they become more unstable, but it's different because the self-organization becomes more robust, and morphogenesis is becoming more complex. Like these guys in the right, their structures become more complex. I will describe a few emergent phenomena in this system, but currently I only do observations and can give some examples. In the future, I will do more systematic experiments and do more analysis, and also some more theory building. In the original system of Lenia, if we try to collide the life forms in the grid, they tend to mix up or they just die out. But in the extended system, a very special quality called individuality emergence. Many life forms, if they are able to maintain their own boundaries, that the invisible boundaries will stabilize the life form so that they become more coherent. And when I try to collide the life forms with each other, they can protect themselves, and they can separate from the environment and from each other. So in this system, the life forms become an individual or agent. These agents interact with each other with attractive or repulsive forces, and they are capable of more complex interactions or reactions. Like these creatures, you can see the attractive and repulsive forces in between, and they try to maintain their shape even they're colliding. The second phenomena is self-replication. Some species of life forms, they are able to reproduce themselves. It's usually done by binary fission. That means one creature sometimes separate into two copies. In some cases, that is highly reproductive. They can even grow from debris. There is also a case of autocatalysis. That means if the creatures get crowded, they are doing more self-replications. With this self-replication, and also if the creatures sometimes died out, it will produce a healthy community of cells or creatures that will not be too overcrowded. This is one example of self-replication. And these cell-like creatures just do a binary fission into two copies, and it will continue to reproduce. In multiple channel case, that is, the system is built by parallel universe, parallel worlds of grids. The evolved creatures may have different parts from various channels that coordinate with each other and form a aggregated coherent life form. These parts may occupy specific regions of the life form, and they may have special roles. Like some parts may become a core that act as an anchor of other parts, or some channels may form the body of the life form that define the extent of the life form. Interestingly, some channels may form some parts that looks like a pseudopod that guide the movement of the whole creature. Like these three channels, red, green, blue, they combine to form a life form, but the parts themselves are doing their own work. So also in the multi-channel case, for the same genotype, for genotype, I mean the combination of the parental values. For the same genotype, they may produce a family of phenotypes. The creature may change with rich phenotypes by rearranging its parts and until it reaches a stable configuration or a strata in the space. This change or switch between phenotypes that can cause group level behaviors. For example, if there is a phenotype that is capable of self-replication, then it will produce a colony of a growing population. And if some of the phenotypes are immobile and is stable, then the colonies become a tissue-like megastructure, like this one. It looks like some kind of multicellularity happening in this colony. And you see in this genotype, they have 6 phenotypes or more. That is, they can interact with each other. This is an example of multiple phenotypes. They change to another phenotype when they collide. So with this emergent phenomena, in some advanced life forms, we can call them virtual cells or even virtual eukaryotic cells. They come with these emergent properties. First, they are individuals that have self-boundaries that looks like cell membranes. They have internal divisions of labor that is analogous to the organelles in the cells. They also have phenotypic polymorphism that is like differentiation of the stem cells in our bodies. They have different roles, like some of them are moving, some of them are stable, and some of them are self-replicating. These cells form tissues or colonies that is analogous to the multicellularity in the eukaryotic cells. We start to see some form of cell-cell communication in these virtual cells. But we are still not sure is really communication or just random bits. This is the...
Sorry, Bert, we have about 30 seconds or a minute maximum left.
Oh, okay, so these are the creatures I find a few days ago. Also, we find 3D structures in some higher dimensions. Only 1 minute left, right? So we've give some, so Lenia can be the bridge between Alife and AI. That means Lenia can be a playground for deep learning or AI methodologies. And also the Lenia the architecture become a neural network that can be evolvable or even trainable. We see the emergence of agents in this grid-based system, which is very interesting. So, but how can we recognize individuals in this system? We may need some information theories to recognize them. We may also see higher levels of emergence if we do more experiments, and that may lead to open-ended evolution. And by recreating life phenomena, it may have implications to astrobiology or origin of life or life. So thank you for watching.
Thank you. That was just an incredible talk. There are a lot of questions. I think this being the final presentation of the day, I think we can take time to take a few questions. But of course, anyone who needs to leave should feel free to do so during the happy hour or your own actual life. Let me scroll back up. So you answered quite a bit of the questions. Christopher and I were wondering, you call them species in Lenia. Do they somehow self-reproduce or self-maintain? And what measure of fitness do you use? You said you use a GA to explore the space of parameters. What is fitness in your search?
For the species, I mean, there are a lot of life forms or patterns in there. Actually, there are infinite many types of creatures, but I group some of them. They are very similar to others into a species. So if one creature is moving forward and is circular shape, then I would call that a species of many creatures. So another question is the GA. The only criteria I use is survival. That means if I change the parameters and it's still moving and do not vanish or do not explode, then it's successful. And then I will take this example and further evolve into more advanced creatures. Yeah.
I think a lot of comments are just people thinking this is beautiful and awesome. Oscar had a question: how does the complexity of the creatures relate to their stability?
Okay, in the original Lenia, the creatures are relatively simple. So they are not very stable actually, because when you collide with each other, they will die out. But with more complexity in the extended rule, they become more stable. My guess is that with more complexity, like the different parts that work with each others in the multi-channel case, they are actually working with each other to stabilize and doing their work like some channels. They may provide some repulsive forces to keep other creatures away. So they are more stable as a whole creature. So complexity to give stability in some cases.
So can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, of course.
So reason I'm asking is because in discrete automata, I think like even if you flip a single cell, you might end up destroying the whole organism, right?
Yes.
So in here, like, do you have an intuition, like what you can do in sort of a targeted way to actually increase the robustness of these organisms? Like, how can you explicitly optimize for it?
You mean in Lenia, how can we make the creatures less fragile?
Right. Like, how can they be more stable in terms of like when they collide with each other and maybe other situations, but mainly the interactions.
Yeah, I'm still figuring out how they work in this way. That means it's a emergent phenomena in this continuous cellular automata that is very different from the discrete ones that the creatures are very fragile. You can change a bit and it will collapse. So in the case of continuous CA, I think the self-organization firstly came from the continuous the neighborhood or the kernel that the cells or the inference from other cells are able to average or mingle with each other. So it's not just the inference from a few cells, that is the inference from many other cells. So the inference got averaged out. So that makes the whole creatures more robust. This is my thought.
So,
okay.
and there were more questions. We can keep the conversation going. I suggest you reach out on Slack if you have more questions for Bert. And if we want to keep the conversation going, we can move to one of the whereby rooms for the social hour if anyone's interested. I'd love to see more pictures or videos of your result. So for now, let's thank Bert once again and all the speakers of the session. This was one of my favorites so far in the conference. This was great. Thank you.